Welcome to Opinions May Vary. This week I'm Opinions Editor Andrew Gleinser, and I'm here with columnist Logan Lane. And this week we'll be discussing what the best piece of presidential advice was. So Logan, we'll start with you. Basically, can you summarize your column and your main points?
I chose to go with former President Ronald Reagan's an excerpt from his farewell speech back in 1988 when he said, "I hope we once again have reminded people that man is not free unless government is limited. There's a clear cause and effect here that is neat and predictable as a law of physics. As government expands, liberty contracts." And the reason I chose this was because I felt like it really translated to a lot of the issues that we're dealing with today. A lot of people are discussing the expansion of government and government policies, and they feel like the government is growing and starting to really overstep their boundaries into the U.S. citizens' personal lives and taking over some things that they really shouldn't be in charge of. And I thought that this was relevant because he said this back in 1988, and we're still kind of dealing with it now, and it hasn't seemed to backtrack any since then.
And I chose to do a piece from George Washington's farewell address in which he warned about the dangers of the national debt. Washington recognized that, especially during war times, a national debt is going to build up, when it needs to, when the government needs to spend money. But that when wartime is over, we need to be very quick and efficient about paying it back. Now, our national debt right now stands at over $17 trillion, which it kind of boggles the mind at how big of a number that is. And part of that is due to the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, but then part of it is due to just out of control government spending, which you touched on. And it's partially due now to an almost outright refusal from politicians these days to deal with it. They almost refuse to do anything to try and start paying back that deficit. And I mean, case in point happened last week with the vote to raise the debt ceiling in Congress. There was hardly any debate about it. The Republicans, who are supposed to be the ones who are serious about paying back the national debt, they just rolled over and said, okay, we'll raise the debt ceiling again. And for a lot of people, it seems like just a number. I know, obviously, for a lot of politicians, it seems that way. But it's a big-time crisis because Washington recognized that if the people in power, the people who are responsible for this debt, if they don't pay it back, that burden shifts to the next generation. That's something he mentioned in his address as well. And that's what's going to happen here. If the people in power now don't start to fix this problem, it's going to be our generation that has the responsibility of paying back this deficit. We're going to have to earn this burden, which we had nothing to do with. And we're the ones who are going to have to pay it back, while the people in power now get to collect their fat pension checks from the government when they retire. And that's why I see this as a big problem.
So, what do you think needs to happen to change the course that we're headed towards right now with the ever-expanding national debt in regards to what President Washington said?
Well, President Washington recognized that while it is the responsibility of the representatives in Congress to deal with it, it's also partly our responsibility as citizens to make that part of the public debate, basically push the issue. And we have to push the issue. We have to tell the politicians that this is not acceptable, that this is, it's poor fiscal policy. It's just absolutely terrible. And we have to voice our opinion collectively and say we're not happy with this, we're not happy with the financial course that we're on, and we demand that it be fixed. Now, not going to be easy. There's going to have to be a lot of cuts. There's going to have to probably be some raising of revenue somewhere in order to get it fixed, because $17 trillion isn't just going to go away overnight. But we as an American citizenry have to recognize that this is a huge problem, and we have to stand up and say, we want this fixed, and we have to demand it from our politicians. That's the only way it's going to get fixed, because if we just expect them to do it on their own, they're probably not going to. So, same question to you.
Well, I actually share the same kind of explanation because I think it's really in the people's hands to change, to demand that the government kind of stop intruding on their personal lives. Now, there's a lot of issue, a lot of discussion with the Affordable Health Care Act, and I think one issue with politics now that's really disappeared from what it used to be, especially back in when the founding fathers were around, is the idea of morality intermingled with politics. It's not really supposed to go together. If you think of somebody's being politically correct, it means they're being morally correct, but the definition is changing. And I think that we as a people need to consider nobody wants any family to not have health care, to not be able to afford health care. But when are we going to stand up or put our foot down and say, okay, let's provide them, let's help them out, but now they've gone too far. Another big thing is NSA spying and the IRS targeting, which is kind of more controversial. But the NSA has definitely overstepped their bounds, and everybody knows it. And there's a section of people, especially people our age, the younger generation, that is really trying to stand up and like make their voices heard about that. Unfortunately, it's not really loud enough, and the politicians just don't really seem to care. They just sort of take it, some might go on the news and say a few words about it, but they continue to do what they want to do. And it needs to be nothing, violent or anything like that, anything crazy, but we all need to kind of come together and look past, any racial boundaries or sexual boundaries or any kind of like political identity boundaries or anything, and just come together as people and be like, listen, we want to live as free Americans, and we want to be treated the way that the Constitution and the Bill of Rights says that we're to be treated by our government, and we think that you've gone too far. And I think until then, basically the government's been getting away with it, and they're going to continue to go on this path until they stop getting away with it. And they need to hear the people stand up and tell them that they're not happy with it.
And I think one thing that's interesting to note here is that these two presidents that we talked about, who were presidents nearly 200 years apart, both understood the importance of the people. And they both recognized that if there's going to be real change in this country, there's going to be real progress in this country on any issue, it has to come from the people.
Right. And just like the American Revolution, when we became a country, it was because the people weren't happy. They wanted to be separated from the crown. And that was, an amazing time in our history. And unfortunately, we're kind of headed towards the way that, Europe was back then whenever we were under the crown. We're letting the government get away with things because we're just accepting it. And I don't think that that's what we should be doing.
Well, that's all for this week's Opinions May Vary. Thanks for joining us. For Logan Lane, I'm Andrew Gleinser, and we'll see you next week.